time on Blessed Man Meditations, where we provide answers for the intellectual side of Christianity and equip Christians to provide a defense for the hope that is in them. We continue looking at the supposed Bible contradictions, a list of 101 submitted by noted Muslim scholar Shabbir Ally. This time we begin with number 79 and end with number 89. We've done an introduction and 1 through 78 in previous videos. Number 79, apart from Jesus, there was no one else, or there were others who ascended to heaven. John chapter 3, verse 13 says, no one else ascended to heaven. And 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11, it says, no one ascended to heaven. Or it says in John chapter 3, it says there was no one, and in 2 Kings chapter 2, it says there were others, where Elijah went up to heaven. So Elijah went up to heaven in 2 Kings 2:11, and then Jesus came and said that no one ascended. And of course, that would seem to be a contradiction, because Jesus would seem to not be referring to Elijah when he made that statement. There were others who went to heaven without dying, such as Elijah and Enoch. Yeah, in Genesis chapter 5, it says Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. There that is. In John 3:13, Jesus is setting forth his superior knowledge of heavenly things. Essentially, what he is saying is no other human being can speak from first-hand knowledge about these things as I can, since I came down from heaven. Jesus is claiming that no one has ascended to heaven to bring down the message that he brought. In no way is Jesus denying that anyone else is in heaven, such as Elijah and Enoch, and of course present day and from previous generation believers who are absent from the body, they're immediately present with the Lord. Rather, Jesus is simply claiming that no one on earth has gone to heaven and returned with a message such as he offered to them. So rather than a contradiction, it's just something that needed to be explained further to Shabbir. Number 80. Was the high priest Abiathar or Abimelech when David went into the house of God and ate the consecrated bread? Mark 2:26 says the high priest was Abiathar, and 1 Samuel 21 and 1 Samuel 22 say it was Abimelech. Okay, in Mark 2, it says in the days of Abiathar the high priest. In 1 Samuel 21, it says Ahimelech was the high priest. In 1 Samuel 22, it says one of the sons of Ahimelech, referring to that high priest. So Jesus states that the event happened in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and yet we know from 1 Samuel that Abiathar was not actually the high priest at that time. It was Abiathar's father, Ahimelech. If we were to introduce an anecdote by saying when King David was a shepherd boy, it would not be incorrect, even though David was not king at that time. In the same way, Abiathar was soon to be high priest, and this is what he's most remembered for, hence he was designated by his title. Moreover, the event certainly did happen in the days of Abiathar, as he was alive and present during the incident. We know from 1 Samuel 22:20 that he narrowly escaped when his father's whole family and their town was destroyed by Saul's men. Therefore, Jesus' statement is quite acceptable. Number 81. Was Jesus' body wrapped in spices before burial in accordance with Jewish burial customs, or did the women come and administer the spices later? In John 19, it says, and Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds, and then took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Mark 16:1, now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices that they might come and anoint him. So John 19 clearly states Joseph and Nicodemus wrapped the body in 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes along with the strips of linen. We also know from the synoptic writers that the body was placed in a large shroud. There need be no contradiction here. The fact that the synoptics do not mention the spices during the burial does not mean that the spices were not used. If Mark 16:1 is taken to mean that the women were hoping to do the whole burial process themselves, they would need strips of linen as well, and those strips of linen are not mentioned in Mark 16. It's likely that they simply wished to perform their last act of devotion to their master by adding extra spices to those used by Joseph. As Jesus died around the 9th hour, there would have been time, almost 3 hours, for Joseph and Nicodemus to perform the burial process quickly before the Sabbath began. We need not suppose that there is only time for them to wrap his body in a shroud and deposit it in the tomb. So, no contradiction there either. Number 82. Did the women buy the spices after or before the Sabbath? Mark 16 seems to say that they bought the spices after the Sabbath. Luke 23 and Luke 24 seem to say that they bought the spices before the Sabbath. There's Mark 16, it says they bought spices, and it says when the Sabbath was passed. Okay, in the Luke 23 passage, it says, and the women who come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb, and his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils. Okay, and then on the first day of the week, early in the morning, they came to the tomb bringing the spices they had prepared. Several details in the accounts of the resurrection suggest that there were in fact 2 groups of women on their way to the tomb, planning to meet each other there. There's a later question with more on this. Now, it becomes clear that Mary Magdalene and her group bought their spices after the Sabbath, as recorded by Mark 16:1. On the other hand, Joanna and her group bought their spices before the Sabbath, as recorded by Luke 23:56. It is significant that Joanna is mentioned only by Luke, thereby strengthening the proposition that it was her group mentioned by him in the resurrection account. So, if there are 2 groups of women, then there need not be a contradiction. Number 83. Did the women visit the tomb toward the dawn, like it says in Matthew 28:1, or when the sun had risen in Mark 16:2? Matthew 28:1, after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. Mark 16:2, early in the morning, first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. Brief look at the passages concerned will help clear up any misunderstanding. Matthew 28:1, at the dawn, they went to look at the tomb. Mark 16:2, very early, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. Luke 24, very early in the morning, they went to the tomb. John 20, verse 1, early while it was still dark, they went to the tomb. Thus we see that the 4 accounts are easily compatible in this respect. It is not even necessary for this point to remember that there were 2 groups of women, as the harmony is quite simple. From Luke, we understand that it was very early when the women set off for the tomb. From Matthew, we see that the sun was just dawning, yet John makes it clear that it had not yet done so fully. The darkness was on its way out, but had not yet gone. Mark's statement that the sun had risen comes later, when they were on their way. It is perfectly reasonable to assume that the sun had time to rise during their journey across Jerusalem. Number 84. Did the women go to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body with spices, like it says in Mark and Luke, or to see the tomb, like it says in Matthew, or for no reason, like it says in John? Mark 16:1, when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary mother of James, Salome brought spices that they might come anoint him. Luke 23:55, the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Now on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them came to the tomb bringing the spices they had prepared. Matthew 28:1. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other woman and the other Mary came to see the tomb. John 20, verse 1, now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. This answer links with number 81 above. We know that they went to the tomb in order to put further spices on Jesus' body, as Luke and Mark tell us. The fact that Matthew and John do not give a specific reason does not mean that there was no specific reason. They were going to put on spices, whether or not the gospel authors all mention it. We would not expect every detail to be included in all the accounts, otherwise there'd be no need for 4 accounts if all the accounts were going to be identical. Number 85, when the women arrived at the tomb, was the stone rolled back, like it says in 16 verse 4? Was the stone rolled away, like it says in Luke 24 verse 2? Was the stone taken away, like it says in John 20 verse 1? Or did they see an angel do it, like it says in Matthew 28, 1-6? In Mark 16:4, it says the stone had been rolled away. In Luke 24 verse 2, it says they found the stone rolled away. In John chapter 20 verse 1, it said the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Matthew 28, 1-6, the angel descended, came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. Okay, Matthew does not say that the women saw the angel roll the stone back. This accusation is indeed trivial. After documenting the women setting off for the tomb, Matthew relates the earthquake, which happened while they were still on their way. Verse 2 begins by saying there was a violent earthquake, the Greek of which carries the sense of now there had been a violent earthquake. When the women speak to the angels in verse 5, we understand from Mark 16:5 they had approached the tomb and gone inside where he was sitting on the ledge where Jesus' body had been. Therefore, the answer to the question is that the stone was rolled away when they arrived. There is no contradiction. Number 86. In Matthew chapter 16, Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, the women were told what happened to Jesus' body, while in John 20, Mary was not told. Here's Matthew 16. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. Okay, Matthew 28:7, and go quickly tell his disciples that he's risen from the dead, and indeed he will go before you to Galilee, and you will see him. Behold, I've told you. Mark 16, entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, don't be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. Luke 24, verses 4 and 5. As it happened, they were greatly perplexed about this, that behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. And as they were afraid and bowed their faces to the earth, they said to them, why do you seek the living among the dead? And then Luke 24:23. When they did not find his body, they came, saying that they had also seen a vision of the angels who said that he was alive. John 20, verse 2. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, referring to John, and said to them, they've taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they laid him. Mary was not told. There we go. The angels told the women that Jesus had risen from the dead. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all are clear on this. The apparent discrepancy regarding the number of angels is cleared up when we realize that there were two groups of women. Mary Magdalene and her group probably set out from the house of John Mark, where the Last Supper had been held. Joanna and some other unnamed women, on the other hand, probably set out from Herod's residence in a different part of the city. Joanna was the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, according to Luke 8:3, and it was therefore highly probable that she and her companions set out from the royal residence. With this in mind, it is clear that the first angel who rolled away the stone and told Mary and Salome where Jesus was had disappeared by the time Joanna and her companions arrived. When they got there, in Luke 24, verses 3-8, two angels appeared and told them the good news, after which they hurried off to tell the apostles. In Luke chapter 24, verse 10, all the women are mentioned together as they all went to the apostles in the end. We are now in a position to see why Mary Magdalene did not see the angels. John chapter 20, verse 1 tells us that Mary came to the tomb, and we know from the other accounts that Salome and another Mary were with her. As soon as she saw the stone rolled away, she ran to tell the apostles, assuming that Jesus had been taken away. The other Mary and Salome, on the other hand, satisfied their curiosity by looking inside the tomb where they found the angel who told them what had happened. So we see that the angels did inform the women, but that Mary Magdalene ran back before she had the chance to meet them. Number 87. Did Mary first meet the resurrected Jesus during her first visit or on her second visit? And how did she react? Matthew 28, verse 9 appears to say that Mary Magdalene first met the resurrected Christ during her first visit. John 20, verses 11-17 seems to say that she met the resurrected Jesus on her second visit. Okay, 28:9, Matthew, it says, as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, rejoice. So they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. So I guess Mary Magdalene could have been in that group, according to Matthew, according to the thought about Matthew. In John chapter 20, Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked at the tomb, saw the two angels, and she's upset because they had taken away, she says, because they'd taken away the Lord. And Jesus came to her. She initially didn't recognize him. And he says to her, "Who are you looking for?" She thinks he's the gardener. And then Jesus says her name, and she recognizes him. And she appears to be pleasantly surprised, and it doesn't say she worshipped him, but I would imagine that type of reunion with the risen Lord would have elicited a response of worship. Even if this text doesn't say that happened, it doesn't mean that it didn't, because there are plenty of other times where those types of things did happen, where they did worship him when they saw him. So we've established in the last answer that Mary Magdalene ran back to the apostles as soon as she saw the stone had been rolled away. Therefore, when Matthew 28:9 records Jesus meeting them, she was not there. In fact, we understand from Mark 16:9 that Jesus appeared first to Mary Magdalene, after which she, Peter, and John had returned to the tomb the first time. Here we see that Peter and John saw the tomb and went home, leaving Mary weeping by the entrance. From here, Mary saw the two angels inside the tomb and then met Jesus himself. As all this happened before Jesus appeared to the other women, it appears that there was some delay in them reaching the apostles. We may understand what happened by comparing the complementary accounts. Matthew 28, verse 8 tells us that the women, Mary, the mother of James and Salome, ran away, afraid yet filled with joy, to tell the disciples. It appears that their fear initially got the better of them, for they said nothing to anyone, according to Mark 16, verse 8, which some people consider, I think, that to be the last verse of Mark's Gospel. It was at this time that Jesus suddenly met them, according to Matthew 28. Here, he calmed their fears and told them once more to go tell the apostles. There are several apparent problems in the harmonization of the resurrection accounts, a few of which have been touched on here. It has not been appropriate to attempt a full harmonization in this short paper, as we've been answering specific points. A complete harmonization has been commendably attempted by John Wenham in Easter Enigma. Anyone with further questions is invited to go to John Wenham's Easter Enigma book. It must be admitted that we have in certain places followed explanations or interpretations that are not specifically stated in the text. This is entirely permissible, as the explanations must merely be plausible. It is clear that the gospel authors are writing from different points of view, adding and leaving out different details, as suited their purposes. This is entirely to be expected from four authors writing independently about the same events. Far from casting doubts on their accounts, it gives added credibility, as those details which at first appear to be in conflict can be resolved with some thought, yet are free from the hallmarks of obvious collusion, either by the original authors or by subsequent editors. Number 88. Did Jesus instruct his disciples to wait for him in Galilee, like it says in Matthew 28:10, or that he was ascending to his Father and God, like it says in John chapter 20, verse 17? In Matthew 28:10, it says, Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid, go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." In John chapter 20, verse 17, Jesus said to her, "Don't cling to me. I've not ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." This apparent contradiction asks, what was Jesus' instruction for his disciples? So Shabbir uses John chapter 28, verse 10, and Shabbir uses Matthew 28, verse 10, and John chapter 20, verse 17 to demonstrate this apparent contradiction. However, the two passages occur at different times on the same day, and there's no reason to believe that Jesus would give his disciples only one instruction. This is another contradiction which depends upon the reader of Shabbir's book being ignorant of the biblical passages and the events surrounding that Sunday morning resurrection. I say Sunday because it is the first day of the week. The two passages, in fact, are complementary, not contradictory. This is because the two passages do not refer to the same point in time. Matthew 28:10 speaks of the group of women encountering the risen Jesus on their way back to tell the disciples of what they had found, an empty tomb, and then receiving the first set of instructions from him to tell the disciples. The second passage from John chapter 20, verse 17 occurs sometime after the first passage. To understand the time frame, read from the beginning of this chapter. It takes place when Mary is by herself at the tomb, grieving out of bewilderment due to the events unraveling around about her. She sees Jesus and gives her And he gives her another set of instructions to pass on to the disciples. 89. Upon Jesus' instructions, did the disciples return to Galilee immediately or after at least 40 days? They didn't read the entire text and misquoted the text. Shabbir didn't read the entire text and Shabbir misquoted the text. Matthew 28:17, when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Luke 24, verse 33, so they rose up that very hour, returned to Jerusalem, found the 11, and those who were with them gathered together. Luke 24:49, behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with power from on high. Acts 1:3-4, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but wait for the promise of the Father. The supposed contradiction asks when the disciples returned to Galilee after the crucifixion. It's argued from Matthew 28, verse 17, that they returned immediately, and from Luke chapter 24, verses 33 and 49, and Acts chapter 1, verse 4, that it was after at least 40 days. However, both of these assumptions are wrong. It would appear that Jesus appeared to them many times, sometimes individually, sometimes in groups, and as the whole group gathered together, and also, at least, to Paul and Stephen after the ascension. He appeared in Galilee and Jerusalem and other places. Matthew 28 is a summary of the appearances of Christ, and it is for this reason that it is not advisable to overstress chronology in this account, as Shabbir seems to have done. The second argument in this seeming contradiction is an even weaker argument than the one just responded to above. This is because Shabbir has not fully quoted Acts 1:4, which says on one occasion while he was eating with them, he gave them this command, don't leave Jerusalem, wait for the gift my Father's promised, which you have heard me speak about. Now, the author of Acts, Luke, in this passage does not specify when Jesus said this. Luke did not specify when Jesus said this. However, in this gospel, he does, in Luke's gospel, Luke does the same thing as Matthew and groups together all the appearances, so again, it would be unwise to read too much chronologically into the passage in Luke 24:36-49. However, it's apparent from the Gospels of Matthew and John that some of the disciples at least did go to Galilee and encounter Jesus there, presumably after the first encounter in Jerusalem and certainly before the end of the 40-day period before Christ's ascension into heaven. That is the end of number 89. That is the end of this installment of answering the supposed Bible contradiction submitted by Muslim scholar Shabbir Ally. Next time, we will do 90 to 101 and concluding thoughts, and that should be the last one in this series. So, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.